Hey everyone, today I will be talking about Jordan B. Peterson, the public intellectual most people on the internet have already heard of, the psychologist who rose to fame due to his refusal to comply with the Canadian Bill C-16 law, who set the internet ablaze after his infamous interview with Kathy Newman, and the man who has probably seen hundreds of slanderous hit pieces that misrepresented him one after another, the self-improvement guru who helped millions of people to sort out their lives and get themselves in order. Jordan Peterson started his infamous internet career by uploading his university lectures on YouTube, in which he advises people on how to make better versions of themselves. He focused on the individual's role in society and the hidden strengths and weaknesses every person has, which can be exploited and turned into real potential if used the correct way.
So the question is, well, what can you do about your industriousness? And the answer to that is, well, that's kind of rough too, because there's a strong genetic component. But you can work on micro habits with regards to your conscientiousness. And I think the best micro habits, this is partly to do with this future authoring program processes, I think the best thing you can do with regards to your conscientiousness is to set up some aims for yourself.
He spread a psychological message that apparently millions of people were thirsty for and tapped into the subconscious minds of lost people worldwide who were looking for a clear direction in life. Despite being a clinical psychologist lecturing at the University of Toronto, his views on feminism, politics, and economics eventually came to the surface when he decided to step out of his lecturing career and host worldwide talks about personal responsibility and the issues he thinks humanity is facing today.
Until women got full legal rights, they could own property for themselves, they could work. Essentially, they were owned. They were first owned by their fathers and then by their husbands.
Status to the domination by men. You already said that you thought that what emancipated women primarily in the 20th century was technological revolution.
No, not primarily, but that's one of two. I think that's two things.
Not primarily, eh?
No,
you don't think the pill was a primary force in the emancipation of women?
I think
or the invention of tampons, let's say, or the provision of proper sanitary facilities, toilets, and that sort of thing. You're thinking instead it was the action of courageous feminists in the 1920s that produced a social revolution that overthrew the patriarchy. That's your theory.
Yeah, I think
that's a foolish theory.
Are these really the only things, however, that he talked about in a benign, help yourselves and help others kind of way? Looking back from 2021, his views on politics and economics now seem much more concerning than they did so in the past. For a long time, his political and economic views appeared to be straight and transparent, but due to recent events, it is clear that this impression is clearly mistaken and needs to be adjusted. This is what I will address in this video. I personally used to watch Jordan Peterson regularly, consume all the interviews of him I could find, watch his lectures, listen to music made of him, and I also read his book 12 Rules for Life. The core message of his 12 Rules for Life book helped tens of thousands of people to straighten their lives and taught people many valuable things, such as the importance of always telling the truth, standing up straight, how to argue and think, all of which also helped me personally, and I will forever be grateful for these messages. Even though I did not know him personally, he was someone I think most people could look up to and turn to in case of any trouble or need. So what is the issue then? Somewhere around 2020, while Peterson was recovering in Russia, a weird feeling in the back of my mind did not let me rest. I had the feeling that despite agreeing with so much of what Peterson was teaching, something was off about the message he spread, but I couldn't exactly put my finger on what it was. It wasn't his psychological message, for example, telling the truth and how to face your fears, because those, as far as I can tell, are all based in data, nothing much to argue about. It was not quite his philosophical beliefs either, for example, is religion important in society or not? I wasn't sure I always agreed with him on all philosophical topics, but it was easy enough to move past those disagreements. After weeks of thinking of what concerned me about his teachings, the revelation started to dawn on me. His overwhelming focus on individualism began muddying the waters and shining a different light on his message. What do I mean here? Jordan Peterson often preaches the importance of individual responsibility, of personal responsibility, a concept that means taking responsibility for your own actions, owning up to them, not cowering behind defenses, and facing the truth, all of which are extremely important and formidable self-disciplines. However, through the years, his stance on individual responsibility has become overbearing and extremist to the point where it was all that mattered. His core message started to shift from facing up to your challenges to something like stopping all sorts of complaining and fixing the world all by yourself. His message started to not only exclude, but specifically shut out any form of collective action, be that protesting, activism, or any form of collective bargaining.
Embarrassing, humbling, and difficult. And then you can do something like be an activist and you get all that public acclaim for being on the good side with no effort whatsoever.
This accompanied an additional viewpoint of his, whereby Jordan often states what he thinks the problem is with the radical left, and how the radical left is going too far, and how radical leftist activists should just man up and learn some trade instead of fighting against injustice. Already by 2020, a different Peterson started to appear from the one that emerged in 2017 and 2018. Instead of being an apolitical public figure focusing on self-improvement and critical thinking, he became a more anti-left figure, someone to push back against any form of social action or collectively fought change. His overbearing focus on individualism has gotten to the point where he tweeted, "Do you know how to build a better world? Then build it." Now, unfortunately for Peterson, this is a toxic gaslighting mentality at best and a dangerous neoliberal apologetic at worst, not something that actually suits a professional psychologist. It started to seem that Peterson thinks that every person has nothing better to do in his or her life than be the best at his or her job, and then things will magically just turn for the better. No need for collective bargaining, no need for social change. Those are just left-wing activist things that are useless and only plunge the world into a mindless collectivist dystopia where we will live under the terror of the many. All this pushback against any sort of classical left-wing action started to beg the question: why is he so focused on left-wing activists all the time? Have they really decimated all of humanity in the past? What can history thank to classical left-wing people? For example, to Mahatma Gandhi and his never-ending protests, we can only thank the uprising of hundreds of millions of Indian people. To Martin Luther King Jr., we can only thank the grants of equality to all Black Americans. To workers' unions, we can only thank the 5-day work week, the 8-hour workday, the eradication of child labor, paid holidays, sick leave, and fights for fair wages. People often gave their blood for these causes. To these radical left-wing activists, we can only thank social health care, equal rights between employers and employees, subsidized childcare, and welfare states. Peterson seems completely content at telling millions of people that collective action is unnecessary, and if you just work hard enough, things will get better. This is a classical neoliberal message that shifts every blame on the individual and allows large governments or corporations to exploit people to the last drop as nothing but a resource, while the same entities become monopolies in the process. Not one single person individually can stand up to hundreds of lobbyists who, for example, plan on suing entire nations at private courts by judges hired by the very same lobbyists. See TTIP as an example. Peterson doesn't seem to care about these issues or, in fact, upholds the status quo by discouraging people to tackle large-scale issues. Jordan Peterson's tweets add nothing but more fuel to this already blazing fire. He frequently criticizes Bernie Sanders, saying he would turn the United States into Venezuela, bashed Jeremy Corbyn, jumped on to criticize Joe Biden and Kamala Harris the moment they formed government in January 2020, all the while claiming that he is not a political and certainly not right-wing figure. Despite being not political and certainly not right-wing, he regularly praises and associates himself with stereotypically right-wing people, for example, Trump Jr., Charlie Kirk, Stefan Molyneux, Tucker Carlson, Viktor Orban, and refers to fossil fuel lobbyist Bjorn Lomborg. If he wants to associate with such people and represent like-minded ideas, that is his prerogative. However, in that case, he shouldn't try to sell himself as not political and just a quote-unquote classical liberal.
Their basic proposition is that, first of all, that I'm a right-winger of some sort, and that's just not the case.
Politically, I'm a classic British liberal.
This completely contradicts with what he used to preach and makes him hypocritical. It has gotten to the point where now on Twitter he denies climate science and climate change without any hesitation, which is quite funny. Has his own advice not occurred to him yet? He is constantly teaching not to muck about things we don't know enough about.
They're not mucking about with other people. They're not trying to make broad-scale social transformations about which they have no idea.
He does just that now. He knows nothing about climate science, climate data, and still feels confident in sharing an opinion that has been debunked over and over by 96% of scientists from all over the world. By this point, it is not too surprising to read such tweets since his political affiliation appeared clearer and clearer to the public. What is absurd, however, is that he is doing the very same thing to the people he opposes as those people do to him, while claiming that he is different. Namely, he has come to loathe the stereotypically left-wing people and social justice warriors so much that he is willing to associate with any populist and even authoritarian people just to further his own agenda and try to prove he's right.
I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to because it's just so goddamn funny, I can't help but say it. I figured out how to monetize social justice warriors.
This contradicts the very man he was back in 2017, 2018. Someone who started an apolitical, collected, calm psychologist, slowly becoming a stereotypically right-wing populist. Why is it important to say stereotypically left or right-wing? Because it seems Jordan also got caught up in the meaningless political game where people categorize each other as left or right-wing, organize their little political groups, and start hating every other group around them because they are not red but blue or vice versa. I call Trump Jr., Charlie Kirk, and so on stereotypically right-wing because, first, I believe it is best if we try not to play this idiotic game, and second, they do not represent anything right-wing. They are populist. To me, they seem perfectly willing to do anything in order to gain more fame, money, power, you name it. No spine, no principles, only power. Hence the reason I did not mention Ben Shapiro in my examples. As much as I personally disagree with him on a couple of topics, he seems to be a man of principle, someone you could call a classical right-wing person. But if we really want to focus on the individual, as Jordan so emphasizes, then isn't it quite contradictory to start placing each other into different tribes and throw shit at one another? Altogether, Jordan Peterson has valuable lessons. He's psychologically and philosophically sound, but lately has been forming so irresponsible viewpoints that it needed addressing. His shift to the stereotypical right has been more and more emphasized lately, and is something that could be addressed in my estimation. We could go into more details on how he's funded by groups and people that are supported by the Koch lobby, but in general this will hopefully suffice for now. When it comes to politics and economics and ecology, Peterson is definitely not someone to seek advice from.